Hi, boys and girls. Okay, we are on chapter 5 of Babe. Sorry about the cord today. I have to charge my laptop. It keeps shutting down on me. But I've got our cute little Home of the Cappy Camper sign out. And I have to show you something else I borrowed from the classroom and our nice camping quilt because it's a cold day. So I love having a book to read. Okay, the title of chapter 5 is Keep Yelling, Youngin'. So it's kind of got a little slang in there, youngin'. Mrs. Hoggett shook her head at least a dozen times. For the life of me, I can't see why you let that pig run all over the place like you do. Round and round the yard he goes, chasing my ducks about, shoving his nose into everything. Shouldn't wonder, but what is he doing out with you and Fly, moving the sheep all over? Why don't you just shut him up? He's running all his flesh off. He won't never be fit for Christmas. Easter more like it. What do you call him? Just Pig, said Farmer Hoggett. A month had gone by since the village fair, a month in which a lot of interesting things had happened to Babe. The fact that perhaps most concerned his future, though he did not know it, was that Farmer Hoggett had become fond of him. He liked to see the piglet pottering happily about the yard with Fly, keeping out of mischief, as far as he could tell. If you didn't count moving the ducks around, he did that now with a good deal of skill, the farmer noticed, even to the extent of being able once to separate the white ducks from the brown, though he thinks that might have been a fluke. The more he thought about it, the less Farmer Hoggett liked the idea of butchering Pig. The other developments were in Babe's education. Despite herself, Fly found that she took pleasure and pride in teaching him the ways of the sheepdog, though she knew that, of course, he would never be fast enough to work sheep. Anyway, the boss would never let him try. As for Ma, she was back with the flock, her foot healed, her cough better, but all the time that she had been shut in the box, Babe had spent every minute that Fly was out in the stables chatting to the old ewe. Already he understood, in a way that Fly never could, the sheep's point of view. He longed to meet the flock, to be introduced. He thought it would be extremely interesting. Do you know "Do you think I could, Ma?" he said. "Could what, young'um?" "Well, could I visit you when you go back to your friends?" "Oh, you could do it easy enough. Only you got to get through the bottom of that gate and up the hill to the big field in the lane. Don't you know that the farmer's what he'd say, though? Or that wolf?" Once Fly had slipped quietly in and found him perched on the straw. "Babe," she had said sharply, "you're not talking to that silly old thing, are you?" "Well, yes, Mom, I was." "Save your breath, dear. It won't understand a word you say." "Bah," said Ma. For a moment Babe was tempted to tell his foster mother that he had in mind what he had in mind, but something told him to keep quiet. Instead, he made a plan. He would wait for two things to happen. First, for Ma to rejoin the flock, and for after that, for market day, when both the boss and his mum would be out of the way. Then he would go up the hill. Towards the end of the week, the two things happened. Ma had been turned out, and a couple of days after that, Babe watched as Fly jumped into the back of the Land Rover and drove off to the yard far away. Babe Babe's were not the only eyes that were watching the departure. At the top of the hill, a cattle truck stood half hidden under a clump of trees at the side of the lane. As soon as the Land Rover had disappeared from sight along the road to the market town, a man jumped hurriedly out and opened the gate into the field. Another backed the truck into the gateway. Babe, meanwhile, was trotting excitedly up the hill to pay his visit to the flock. He came up to the gate at the bottom of the field, squeezed under it. The field was steep and curved, and at first he could not see a single sheep. But then he heard a distant drumming of hoofs, and suddenly the whole flock came galloping over the brow of the hill down towards him. Around them ran two strange collies, lean, silent dogs that seemed to float effortlessly over the grass. From high above came the sound of a thin whistle, and in easy partnership the dogs swept around the sheep and began to drive them back up the slope. Despite himself, Babe was caught up in the press of jostling, bleating animals and carried along with them. Around him rose a chorus of panting, protesting voices, some shrill, some hoarse, some deep and guttural, but all saying the same thing. "Woof, woof," cried the flock in dazed confusion. Small by comparison and short in the legs, Babe soon fell behind the main body, and as they reached the top of the hill, he found himself right at the top of the company with an old sheep who cried "Woof." "Ma," he said breathlessly, "is that you?" Behind them, one dog lay down at the whistle, and in front of the flock checked as the other dog steadied them. In the corner of the field, the tailgate and wings of the cattle truck filled with the gateway, and the two men waited, sticks and arms outstretched. "Oh, hello, young'un," puffed the old sheep. "Fine day to come play, I'd say." "What is it? What's happening? Who are these men?" asked Babe. "Rustlers," said Ma. "They're sheep rustlers." "Well, what do you mean?" "Thieves, young'un. That's what I mean. Sheep stealers. We'll all be in that truck before you can blink your eye." "What can we do?" "Do? Ain't nothing we can do, unless you can slip past this here wolf." She made as if to escape, but the dog behind darted in and then turned back. Again one of the men whistled, and the dog pressed, gradually held against the headland of the field by the second dog, and the flock began to move forward. Already the leaders were nearing the tailgate of the truck. "We've been beat," said Mom mournfully. "You run for it, young'un." I will," thought Babe, "but not the way you mean." Little as he was, he felt suddenly not fear, but anger, furious anger, that the boss's sheep were being stolen. "My mum's not here to protect them, so I must," he said to himself bravely, and he ran quickly around the hedge side of the flock, and jumping onto the bottom of the tailgate, turned to face them. "Please," he cried, "I beg you, please don't come any closer. If you would be so kind, dear, sensible sheep." His unexpected appearance had a number of immediate effects. The shock of being so politely addressed stopped the flock in their tracks, and the cries of "Woof" changed to murmurs, and "Isn't he lovely?" and "Proper little gentleman." Ma had told them something of her new friend, and now to see him in the flesh and to hear his well-chosen words released them from the dominance of the dogs. They began to fidget and look about for an escape route. This was opened for them when the men, cursing quietly, for above all things they were anxious to avoid too much noise, sent the flanking dogs to drive the pig away, and some of the sheep began to slip past them. Next moment all was chaos. Angrily the dogs ran at Babe, who scuttled away, squealing at the top of his voice in a mixture of fright and fury. The men closed in on him, sticks raised. Desperately he shot between the legs of one, who fell with a crash, while the other one, striking out madly, hit the rearranged dog as it came to help, and sent it yowling. In half a minute the carefully planned raid was ruined, and the sheep scuttled everywhere. "Keep yelling, young'un," bawled Ma as she ran beside Babe. "They won't never stay here with all this going on." And suddenly all sorts of things began to happen as the deafening squeals rang out over the quiet countryside. Birds flew startled from the trees. Cows in nearby fields began to gallop about. Dogs in distant farms began to bark, passing motorists to stop and stare. In the farmhouse below, Mrs. Hoggett heard the noise as she had on the day of the fair. She struck her head out the window and saw the rustlers and their truck, galloping sheep and Babe. She dialed 999, but then talked for so long that by the time a patrol car drove up the lane, the rustlers had long gone, snarling at each other and their dogs. They had driven hurriedly away, with not one single sheep to show for their plans. "You won't never believe it," cried Mrs. Hoggett when her husband returned from the market, "but we've had rustlers just after you'd gone. Come with a huge cattle truck, they did. The police said they'd seen the tire marks in the gateway, and the chap in the car seen the truck go by in a hurry. And there's been a lot about it, and he gave the alarm, he did, kept screaming and shrieking, enough to bust your eardrums. We should have lost every sheep on the place if it weren't for him. 'Tis him we've got to thank." "Who?" said Farmer Hoggett. "Him," said his wife, pointing at Babe, who was telling Fly all about it. "Don't ask me how he got there or why he done it. All I knows is it saved our bacon, and now I'm going to save his. He's staying with us just like another dog. Don't care if he gets as big as a house, because if you think I'm going to stand by and see him butchered after what he done for us today, you've got another thing coming. What do you have to say about it?" A slow smile spread over Farmer Hoggett's long face. Well, that was a happy ending to a nice chapter.